in pursuit of health and wisdom. Sapio with Buck Joffrey.
Welcome, everybody. This is Buck Joffrey here, and this is the episode number 1 of my new podcast called Sapio. And I'm here with my friend and colleague, Dr. Alan Viglione. Alan, thanks for joining me, man.
Thanks, buddy. I mean, I live and breathe this. We're talking about health and wellness.
Yeah.
You know, you're coming from Wealth Formula. I mean, the question I want to ask you, Buck, is why? What's the purpose of this?
You know, I'm a guy who is, like everybody else, getting a little bit older. And, you know, I started getting interested in longevity. And I also started getting interested in, you know, a lot of other things as well that my Wealth Formula crowd never really gets to see. I come at it with what my background is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm a physician. So when I think about what's interesting to me, a lot of times I'm looking at things through the lens of science and medicine and, you know, psychology and things like that. So I should point out, Sapio is not going to be just about longevity and health, although it's a major part of it, just because it's what interests me right now. And first of all, let's define what it is that we're trying to talk about when we talk about longevity. And there's, you know, terms that people throw around like, you know, lifespan and health span and all those things, right? So what are we trying to get at?
We're trying to live better, more interesting lives, more fulfilled lives, longer, but essentially better. And so where does this stem from? I mean, really, Buck and I talk about these things all the time. We talk about health span. We talk about wellness all the time. We're trying to define it.
Right.
We're just trying to understand it. And this is our journey of doing so.
The other thing that I think is important to understand is we're not just talking about living longer. We're talking about living better. You know, you asked the question, who here wants to live to 120? And not a lot of hands go up in the air. But if you say, okay, what if you could live to 120, but you feel the way you do today? Then everybody, you know, then most people are interested in that concept. You know, we live at a very interesting time. And I think that most people are blind to actually what we are in the middle of right now, which seems to be a revolution of sorts when it comes to lifespan in terms of, you know, being able to extend life, being able to extend life in a way that people will want to live for a long period of time.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, how do you see this fit into your practice on a day-to-day basis? I mean, are you talking about these kinds of issues, or are you doing more sort of your usual, you know?
Yeah, I'm constantly evolving the way I practice medicine, right? So as an internal medicine doctor, you have the classic Western medicine, but I'm constantly trying to find ways to get our patients better, healthier, more interested, more engaged, sleep better, whatever it is. So the value for me of being here, and I appreciate you bringing me on here, is literally just to talk out loud the things that I've come across that I think contribute to longevity, but also quality of life. And we try to identify the most important aspects to wellness, and we help guide our patients through it. What's real, what's not real, what have I come across, what have I changed? You know, I mean, things are constantly evolving, and they're evolving ridiculously fast to the point where I think it's overwhelming.
We're going to talk about we're going to do several podcasts right up front here to cover what we're calling sort of the pillars of longevity, right?
Yeah.
And so when we talk about those pillars, what are they? We've got 1, food and nutrition.
Nature.
Like, what are we going to talk about? Are we going to talk about the pyramid, the food pyramid?
No, archaic.
Yeah.
But really, you know, the things that intrigue Buck and I about this are, you know, nutrition goes well above and beyond this classic archaic food period. It goes beyond what you're eating, how you're eating, when you're eating. And ultimately, if you are trying to optimize your nutritional status, do you need to shave it down? And what's the deal with fun stuff like intermittent fasting?
Yeah. Well, what I think is interesting about the food and nutrition part in particular is I would just say this. We used to think calories in, calories out. That's just math.
Yeah.
As it turns out, it's not.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. It actually does matter what you eat and when you eat and all of these things, how often you eat, and that sort of thing. The next thing on that list, of course, is is exercise, which you know a lot more than me about.
Yeah, exercise is a hard space to, I would say, pin down because everybody's different. Everybody's telling you different things, but we want to get to the science of it, right? Really. And the purpose of exercise to me is to train your heart to the point where you can live longer and better. Really, that's a common theme.
Yeah.
And then we'll get into some nitty gritty about workout regimens and zone 1 versus zone 2, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But that's what I find fun. I find the importance of exercise to be a tool for longevity and a tool for making you feel better, more engaged along the way.
Yeah. What I think is really interesting about exercise too, which I didn't have really any concept of before, was there's actually, for example, there's a significant benefit to your brain from exercise, right? You usually don't think about that.
Yeah.
But as it turns out, there seems to be a significant benefit in mitigating the risk of, say, Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah.
With exercise.
I love it.
Who would have thought, right?
Yeah.
So those kinds of things are going to be really interesting to talk about. The next pillar that we have are drugs and supplements. And that's where a lot of times, sometimes like people think about it and really that's where they start and stop, right? Drugs and supplements.
Yeah.
But there are some real things there as well.
Oh yeah. What are the supplements that can make you live longer? What's the evidence there? What's the data behind it?
Yeah.
And really, we use supplements as a tool. As a Western medicine physician, I'm not pill happy. I don't start popping pills, but I think there's a role for them and knowing who to put them on. But, more fundamentally, what's the science behind it?
That's one of the things we really want to cut to, because there really are some drugs that there is really probably pretty good evidence that they have some additional benefit in allowing for, at least most animal models to extend. So like in rodents and things like that.
Yeah.
So there really are some medications like that, but remarkably, they're not the ones that you necessarily hear about, because there's also a massive industry here. And so what we're trying to do in this drugs and supplements pillar that we talk about is try to separate some of the, I would say, science from the fiction. There is some things that we know that are beneficial. There's other things that maybe they are, maybe they're not, but they're huge money makers, and you'd think that's the only thing that's out there. So it's not that we're, necessarily going to condemn anything, but on the other hand, we're going to try. I think it's really important to shed light on some of this, because especially people I find in this space, they tend to lock in on one, I won't say guru, I'll say one expert or the other expert. But in fact, there's a lot of information flowing, and it's not always the same for multiple experts. So the drug and supplements one is going to be incredibly important. The next pillar, I think, to me, is one of the most fascinating, and that is sleep. Yeah.
Love it.
Sleep.
Love it.
Tell me about sleep. What's the big deal about sleep?
Yeah, well, sleep strongly correlated to your survival. But again, the whole purpose of this for me is not just to talk about the raw number of your lifespan, but it's also health span. And what does sleep do to protect your brain, consolidate memories, bring down anxiety levels, consolidate? I mean, really, sleep is one of those major free aspects of longevity that I think is just often overlooked.
Well, it's often overlooked, and fairly recently too. I mean, again, my background is as a surgeon. Talking about sleep and the need for sleep in surgical residency is a mark of weakness.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
And that's something that, I think is archaic. But I also think that the science and the medicine of sleep is relatively new, right? I mean, I think that even when I was in medical school some years ago, I won't say how many. It's been too many years. But I think we maybe spent a day on lectures and sleep. Yeah. And really, at the end of the day, the way we've treated sleep is as if you're like, pulling out the cord for the night, right? Like, your computer, turning off your computer, and then you turn it on, and maybe, your batteries, but that's not what it is. Sleep is an incredibly complicated, act that really makes no evolutionary sense, right? Like, why would you want to be out cold for 8 hours and let a tiger eat you? There's good reasons that
Right.
you need sleep. So,
Yeah.
so sleep that's going to be one of the ones I think is going to really, I think, open a lot of eyes.
I agree.
The next one we talk about is related to diagnostics.
Yep.
And that's sort of way up your field.
Right. I mean, this is sort of classic medicine or next level medicine, so it's very near and dear to my heart. But diagnostic testing to capture, identify, reverse, and modify ultimately along the way disease. So we're talking about low-hanging fruits. Really, as an internal medicine doctor, gosh, I mean, we have to stay one step ahead of disease, otherwise you're chasing your tail. So when you're identifying these little pillars of health and wellness, the diagnostic category is extraordinarily important to me.
Right. The last one I think that I think is grossly under appreciated, and I think is something that to think a lot about, especially in today's society, is relationships, right?
Yeah.
So we're finding a lot of data, blue zone data, for example, where centenarians are more common, that relationships play a big role in keeping people healthy and alive.
Yeah. Mental wellness.
Right.
I saw a CDC fact just recently that 800,000 people commit suicide every year. I mean, astounding numbers, mental health and wellness and its impact on longevity. It's just simply astounding.
And it's not just about, suicide. It's not just about mental health, but there are actual biological things, biological chemicals that course through your body when you have good social interactions. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, oxytocin being the big one, pair bonding.
So oxytocin is what we think of it when we think of oxytocin as like the thing that causes a woman to lactate, right?
Yeah. And specifically uterine contractions.
Uterine
Oxytocin
contractions,
goes
yeah.
up during labor, but it also has a remarkable physiological role in pair bonding, essentially making, the mother and the child form a kinship together, and serotonin and other hormones just flood the brain. And it's absolutely essential for human wellness.
Yeah. So these are going to be some interesting shows. I mean, we're excited to present this to you. And again, I think the other things I want to mention is like, where does this fit in for you and your life? I mean, you don't have to get crazy with this stuff. I personally find it very, very interesting, but it's not like I'm like it's not like I'm eating some strange protein pellet and, sleeping,
We're just normal guys.
like just normal guy. And you've got a glass of wine, which, really there's zero evidence that that wine can actually benefit your health.
I know.
But I think it's an interesting thing. And as long as you know the rules, you can break them. That's what I tell my kids all the time.
I think that's fair. I mean, really, you want to be happy. You want to be interesting.
Right.
You used that term before, too.
Right.
And nobody's trying to, when we identify the pillars of health and wellness, nobody's trying to live a monotonous, robotic life.
Right.
You're literally just trying to be a better you.
Yeah. And as long as you know what types of things are good for you, what they're not good for you, then, pick and choose. We're not here to judge, but we're here to provide the opportunity to learn and things that we're learning that we're excited about.
Yeah.
So anyway, next step, we'll come back next show with pillar number 1.